Oh, sure, give the guy that lives in New England in the woods a rock racer to review. This is the new Redcat Racing Wendigo, and this looks like an exciting vehicle for those of you that love rock racing. And I like rock racing. I mean, I've watched it. It's very cool. We unfortunately don't have any of that around here, but I'm excited to go and try this out. I've got a couple of spots picked out where I think I'm going to go drive this thing. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And it's kind of exciting to see another rock racer offering out there, a completely ready-to-run rock racer. And this has some pretty neat features on it. I'm pretty excited to tell you guys about it. So first up, I mean, it's a 4500 class style of truck. So, you know, this body here is replicating that class for Ultra 4 rock racing. And I think they did a really good job of kind of keeping that same look that they have in their other vehicles. The Scout, it's kind of got that Scout front end to it. A little bit narrowed up, but the headlights are definitely, you know, from that Scout grille that we've seen before. And then it's on to this one-piece body, basically. This Lexan piece here, the interior is molded into the top of the body. And they got a pretty nice paint scheme on here. Just the sky blue up front. We've got some of this jagged, maybe camo and tear thing going on in the back. Pretty cool custom look to it overall. We've got Redcat decals on the side and license logos as well. We've got Interco and Raceline wheels. Let me move on to the interior because there are some scale features here so that we really need to discuss. So the helmets, they are separate from the molded interior bodies of the figures. And what's pretty neat is they have Lexan visors on here, so you could actually go and tilt them up. They are a tinted visor with a decal. They actually do slide up, and you could paint the figure's face in there if you want to add some extra detail to it. There is a navigation screen, separate navigation screen on the co-pilot side. And then in the back, we've got a twin radiator fan, a separate fuel cell that bolts onto there, and then a jack that's actually just part of the decal. But then we've got this cage. This cage is not part of the chassis. This is just part of the body, and it gives it that 4500 class look. Just a simple flat plate, rectangle plate on the top, a matte finish on there, and definitely looks good for the body on here. I like the body. You can go and put LED lights in there. I don't know why they didn't put LED lights in there. They should have done that. Don't they watch any of my videos? All right, let's pull this off, and we can start to check out the details underneath because, you know, there's a lot to talk about. There's stuff that we've seen before and some stuff that we haven't seen before. So let me put that over here for you guys, get that in the shot. And here, let's talk about the chassis first. The chassis might look similar. This is the Gen 8 chassis. It's the 1.5 millimeter thick ladder frame chassis, and it's worked pretty well. This is a pretty rigid chassis, and they have the standard cross brace bumper mounts that we've seen on that truck before, but there are new bumpers. We got this narrowed up front bumper, of course, for rock racing. You don't want anything to catch on there. It's got that bull bar in the front and just a narrowed up bumper in the rear. And you could actually go put LED lights in the rear as well. So that is, those are new, but the chassis, again, we've seen it. The shock towers, we've seen those from the Gen 8. Same with the body mounts. 9 mounting holes for the shock position here, and I think that's going to be pretty important for tuning this rig. In the center is the battery plate, and it's the battery plate, again, that we saw on the Gen 8 crawler. 2 battery straps to simply secure the battery. And there are some changes. So obviously we no longer have the floor pans here. We've got basically these rock sliders, and they have these new shorter plates now where they go and mount the electronics. So that is separate from this slider plate. But this looks like it's going to, you know, slide over rocks pretty well. The front is angled up just a bit to help it glide over whatever you're crawling over. So those are some pretty neat changes. And to do that, they also had to make these short little basically spacer plates to go and secure the transmission. So that's a change from the Gen 8 as well. So beyond the chassis setup there, what is also similar from the Gen 8 is the center drivetrain components. And so let me move on to that stuff. So this transmission here is from the Gen 8, and then it's got the divorce transfer case with the stubby little universal that connects the two. I did read that this has been revised. If I read it correctly, it sounds like it's been revised, so it's got some tighter tolerances in there, so maybe there's no gear slop. It does have the Mod 1 gears on the inside, and a slipper clutch in there as well, aluminum motor plate. So that is a pretty proven setup. But let me continue on with the drivetrain. So it does have these sliders, both front and rear, with nice steel universals on the end. I think those are going to do well in this application. And now to the big deal. We've got new axles on here, new wider axles. They're not a portal axle, but they did a great job here. It's got a nice diamond pumpkin to it, pretty low profile on the bottom, not too much really hanging down below. But it looks really bulky. They have a really nice big truss across the top of that that axle housing there. The link mounts, they are separate, so you can go and swap those out if you ever want to. But really nice look to it. And on the inside, of course, we got steel axles in the rear, and we have steel universals in the front. And by the looks of it, it looks like they bulked it up in that universal cup. And, you know, I don't think, by the looks of it, it doesn't look like it's going to crack. Of course, we're going to have to test that out. But they did revise that on the Gen 8, so I'm sure they learned and carried that over here. Full ball bearings throughout, and then the gears on the inside, so they got a single piece pinion gear in there, and then they've got the spool with the machine ring gear in there. And then, of course, on the outside, 12mm hexes. They are aluminum, so you don't have to worry about the upgrading from plastic. So the driveline looks pretty cool. I've seen some comments about the axles out there already. Some people are pretty excited about it, and I'm pretty excited to see how they work as well. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to pick these axles up just for projects. So we talked about the driveline, we talked about the chassis. Let's move on to the suspension, and let me start off with the bottom since I've been talking about the bottom. So we've got steel links throughout this kit. I did go ahead, throw a magnet on there. They are steel, they're not aluminum, 5mm. Got some nice rod ends on there, and metal ball studs throughout, no plastic through there. And obviously it's a 4-link in the rear, and then they did the 3-link with the pan hard bar in the front. The other big change here that we haven't seen before from Redcat is they have a sway bar on the rear. It's a single wire mount, a U-shaped wire mount that bolts to the rear bumper mount here. And we got some composite arms to composite links that mount up to the axle there. So that should help keep this thing in check, hopefully. This is a pretty powerful system in here, so I'm sure there's going to be maybe some torque twists, so we'll have to see if this helps settle the truck down. The other thing here is it has these large bore shocks, really nice looking shocks. Aluminum bodies on there, threaded collars, and aluminum caps as well with a composite mounts on the top to metal ball studs. Same with the bottom, they are composite. And the shock perches, actually, I did want to mention the shock perches do have a tall wall to them to help keep the spring centered and to make sure that the spring stays on the perch. One little other tiny detail that I want to throw is they do actually have a color code on the springs. It makes it really easy to identify, you know, when you're digging through your parts bin and stuff for making tuning changes. But the rear shocks are longer than the front, and I kind of noticed that the rear kind of sticks up a little bit. I'm thinking when I put the battery in, it should help settle the rear down a little bit, but the truck is kind of raked down in the front. But that rounds out the suspension details on here. I really like the way it feels. Feels pretty soft, no leaking from the shocks. I noticed that there is a bit of an angle to the shocks in the front. I'm interested to see how that plays out because usually we have a vertical shock. So you know, we'll see how that works. Maybe it's going to help it when it's in cornering and stuff. Now I'm going to move on to the electronics in here. So we have the 25 kg servo. We're starting to see more of these servos in the Redcat ready-to-run vehicles. It's a nice high-torque, metal-geared servo, much better than the older standard servos manufacturers were using. It does have a metal arm on here as well. Doesn't really seem like there's bumps here. I will definitely check that out some more and definitely let you know in my final thoughts of the video. But great to see a high-torque servo in there, and then right behind it is the 540 brushless motor. It's a sensorless motor. It's a 3300 kV motor, a long can, so it should have some torque to it. And then it mates up with this hobby wing-based 60-amp brushless speed controller. And we've basically seen the speed controller before on some other Redcat vehicles like the Camo X4. It's fitted with a T-plug on there, and you know, it's all set up. It's ready to go. It is waterproof. The servo's waterproof. The motor's obviously waterproof. And then in the receiver box over here is your standard Redcat receiver. And it does have those nice extension plugs on there that makes it easy to remove the speed controller or the servo for maintenance without taking the receiver out if you want to. So that pretty much wraps up a lot of the details on this. Finally, let's talk about the Super Swampert tires on here. They are licensed Integro Super Swampert tires. Nice big lug on there. 2.2s, and they are glued to the rims. However, good news, guys, they are much softer foams in here, much softer than the foams that came with the Redcat Gen 8. So this looks like a pretty good tire combination. Probably would have liked to have seen bead locks on here, so if we did want to go tune that tire foam, we could have. But I am a fan of the Super Swampert tire. I just love the way it works in a number of conditions, so I'm excited about that. All right, so let me put this aside. Let me show you what else comes with the kit. Of course, we get the RCR2CE radio system that comes with a lot of the Redcat vehicles. Pretty easy to use radio system. We have all our trim functions underneath this panel here. Nice comfortable wheel. We definitely know that works. And then finally, the bag of goodies that it comes with. So you got a manual, of course. Definitely read through that and get to know your vehicle. And then we have a couple of other things in here. So we've got some more scale detail stuff. So in this bag, we've got a jerry can, we've got a couple of fire extinguishers, and we've got some sand ramps in there. And you can go, slap those on the body as well if you want to. You will have to find a creative way to mount it. There's no easy way to mount it, so you might have to drill some holes and zip tie them on or screw them onto the body. But it's nice that they go give you some accessories to put on to further customize the look. There are also some extra rod ends and the little clips that go onto the back of the lights. If you want to go put the LEDs in there, we've got a speed controller manual, and then of course, what kit would be complete without a box wrench? So we got a box wrench if you need to take the tires off of it. All right, I think that wraps up all the details on the Wendigo. That means it's time to go drive it. So if you like to drive on the ragged edge with a ton of power, I think I found your vehicle here, the Redcat Wendigo. This thing is fast. It's got a ton of power strapped to the chassis, and it is a brute out there when you're driving it. I had a pretty wild experience with it, and I'm of course going to tell you all about it. So what I did is I took it down to Sherwood Island. It's a beach, tons of rock there, and of course sand, and pretty cool sights to look at as well. But I kind of thought it would be the perfect New England spot to go and run this thing and get all types of experiences with it. And just right off the bat, I went and I put a 2S battery pack in it because, you know, I looked at the motor that's in here. I know the speed controller. This is kind of like the system that was in the camo. And I thought it was going to have a lot of power. And even on 2S, it's pretty quick. When you go and pull the throttle on this thing, you definitely notice some torque twists to start with. And on 3S as well, because I ran it on both 2S and 3S. But primarily, I ran it on 2S. And when you pull the throttle, you could see that, you know, the chassis twist a bit. And, you know, I think that sway bar is working. I don't know if it's doing enough. But this chassis, it does start to pull, and that's one of the things you got to keep in mind when you're driving this thing, because as you're hitting rocks and stuff like that, when you're pulling on the throttle to maybe go up and over something, you get some more twists. So that's one of the things that you know, I wanted to tell you guys, is just to be aware of that. The other thing is when you're powering through rocks and stuff, the tires, they've got some good grip to them. They've got some nice large lugs, but they've got some bounce to them as well. And even though we have softer foams in this tire, it's still a pretty stiff tire. So when you're hitting things, it kind of gets bouncy and, you know, unpredictable. Some rock racers that I've driven with other types of tires on there, when you hit something, you know, it's a bit predictable, and this kind of bounces all over the place. So again, kind of on the ragged edge with this vehicle. But the suspension, it does articulate well when you are crawling over rocks. At slower speeds, it is pretty manageable. You know, I think I would have liked to have seen more of a crawler power system in this vehicle. Maybe a brush system with a lower turn motor, so you know, you get some speed out of it, but you still get that nice smooth crawling ability out of it, that nice smooth descent as well. This speed controller and motor system, just tons of power. That's what it really came down to. It was trying to manage it. So again, if you like the fast stuff, this is definitely there. The steering on it was a little bit unpredictable too, because again, when you're hitting those rocks with these tires, things are kind of bouncing. It was just kind of pushing out, and I wasn't able to really carve those lines like I wanted to. I tried to hit a couple of rocks in the same spot a number of times, and every time I was a bit off. So with the bounce of the tires, it was a bit all over the place, and I noticed there is just a tad bit of bump steer as well. So when this thing is articulating, you get a little bump steer in there as well. Now let's talk about some durability stuff. You may have noticed I have a drive shaft in my hand, and that's because on my last battery pack, the screw pin fell out of here. So I would suggest going and checking all the screw pins to make sure they have Loctite on it. This one doesn't look like it did, but the others throughout the entire kit look like they have it. So maybe, you know, it's just a one-off here, and just mine missed the Loctite on that one screw. The other thing to point out is because this thing is so torquey, because it has so much power, I noticed that the wheel nuts tend to loosen up on this. So that's something to check while you're out there running it. Make sure the wheel nuts are tight. Maybe you even want to go add some Loctite onto those. So be aware of that. The tires did come off the rims, and the glue job doesn't look up to par. But I did go ahead and re-glue the tires. I already sent a note to Redcat that they probably want to go and check that, and I told them about the other stuff too. So just to make them aware, since I do have one of the first vehicles out there. And then finally, the steering servo screw did back out as well. So I would suggest checking that and adding Loctite to it. But those were all actually things I could fix easily. You know, I did need to, you know, use some glue and stuff. But you know, I definitely have some screw pins laying around to fix that. But you know, the big thing is how durable is the rest of the vehicle. These axles seem to be pretty solid. There is no notchy feeling when you go and turn the wheels from the universal, so they're not bottoming out. So that's good, that they're not gonna. I don't think they're gonna fail. And again, you know, I beat the stuff up pretty good. There's a lot of marks because those rocks at the beach are pretty jagged, and the front steering links are all beat up. But the rod ends are fine. There's no excessive wear there. There's no wear there at all. You know, the body's pretty beat up. I think what it comes down to with this vehicle is I think it has a ton of potential. I think people are going to enjoy it, but I think if you really want to go out and rock race this thing on a course, I think you're going to have to take some time to do some suspension tuning, maybe find the right tire that's not as bouncy. But for those that just want to go out and bash this type of vehicle, that it's there. I mean, it's on point for that. It's got to be fast. It's got to be fun. It does have some roll to it, so when you're going into some corners and stuff, or you're throttling back after doing a speed run with it across maybe some sand or dirt or something like that, note your chassis roll, because it will go and roll over on you if you're too harsh with the steering. So again, that's just part of rock racing, part of having fun with this vehicle. Spend a little time tuning the suspension if you really want to go race this with some friends or at a club or something like that. And it's definitely going to be a worthy vehicle. It's nice to see another vehicle out in this particular segment. I think it'll definitely give this segment a push and some growth. And, you know, I'm really excited to see what type of builds and projects and racing vehicles people come up with off the Wendigo platform.